My name is John Passfield. I'm going to read from my novel, John Passfield, Saturday Morning. The title of this reading will be Saturday Morning, Video 10, The Great Books as Imagery. Here's the cover of the book, John Passfield, Saturday Morning. 2 Kids on a White Roaster, My Future Wife and I in 1967, novel by John Passfield. So the first John Passfield is the 21-year-old would-be writer. The second John Passfield at the bottom is me, a 75-year-old writer last year. Here's the summary on the back cover. A 21-year-old would-be writer, John Passfield, spends his last few months as a garbage collector on the streets of his hometown, St. Thomas, Ontario, Canada, in the summer of Canada's centennial year, 1967. As he works, he compares the imagery of his own life so far, and of his upcoming marriage and pending career as a high school teacher, to the imagery of the great books that he's reading, all while in pursuit of building the perfect load of garbage. The main character of this novel, me, John Passfield, at 21 years old, is completing his last summer as a garbage man. In September, he will become a teacher of high school English literature and composition. As he builds what he hopes will be the perfect load of garbage, he reviews the books that he'll be teaching to high school students in the fall. I allotted 7 chapters of thought in the novel to the topic of the imagery of the great books. The main character considers the imagery of the great books of the literary heritage in every second chapter for 7 chapters. In order to keep this video short, I will only read 4 of the 7 image arcs of this topic. So the first book he considers, because he's going to be teaching it, is Hamlet, page 22. So the question is, what does the book Hamlet have to do with high school students in rural southern Ontario in the year 1967? And the second question is, well, what does it have to do with me, a young teacher and a would-be writer in 1967 here in Ontario? We took Hamlet in grade 13. He's thinking as he's emptying garbage cans. I just couldn't figure it out. What was Hamlet all about? I remember going uptown and trying to find a library book with some criticism that would help me to sort it all out. Mr. Pryor wanted us to write an essay that would help, an essay on the meaning of the play. He wanted 2 pages, and I couldn't even write 1 word. All we did the year before with Macbeth was memorize the great speeches. I got 10 out of 10 on every quiz I wrote. I thought Shakespeare was just a series of memorable lines. Well, it's one thing to be a student and pass the quizzes. Another thing to just be a reader and say, oh, that book was interesting. What if you have to teach it, What the heck are you going to say about it? What are you going to have? How are you going to kind of illuminate it for the students so they have something valuable to say? What if you want to be a writer? What can you learn from this book? Here's another passage. Our brother and I digging a grave. A man comes over to talk to us. Do you know the play Hamlet? Yes. I can't believe that I'm talking to a couple of actual grave makers. I feel as if I'm in a Shakespeare play. We tell him we're not really grave diggers at all. We're just a couple of kids who are digging a grave. He asks us if we've ever found his skull. Hamlet is a young Danish prince. He travels abroad to study at the university in Wittenberg. His father's the king of Denmark. His father's just won a recent war. He smote the sledded Polak on the ice. Hamlet is born to be a student. He's what you might call a natural prince. He is sensitive and thoughtful. He can play the lute and write an occasional poem. So, thoughts about Hamlet, trying to kind of figure out what it means. Going to page 26, excuse me, a little frog in my throat. But Hamlet's life is changed abruptly. An urgent message calls him home. Something is happening in the castle. His father has fallen asleep in his orchard and not woken up. There's a massive state funeral. But no sooner have the mourners shed their black robes than another court occasion takes place as well. Hamlet's uncle becomes the new king. There's much confusion as to how it has all come about, and the king's new bride turns out to be Gertrude, Hamlet's mom. All of this is disturbing to Hamlet, but he holds his tongue. And then we go to page 28 for the final thought about this book and what it might mean. And then one night something mysterious appears on the castle wall. The night is cold and blustery, with crashing waves. The news is brought to young Hamlet. He shares his late father's name, and he finds himself standing on guard, with a trusted friend or two waiting for a ghost to appear and tell him the news. Suddenly, there it is, the ghost of Hamlet's father. The ghost says something that he wants Hamlet to do. The ghost speaks above the sound of the crashing waves, and what he says throws a wrench into Hamlet's plans. Well, trying to puzzle out like what makes a book interesting, what makes it valuable, what makes it relate to one's own life. Well, you could say, well, I'm interested in Renaissance princes who live in castles and have ghosts visit them, but that's the surface. Further down, it's a person who has his life running well in a certain groove and expects it to continue in that groove, and then suddenly everything's turned upside down. His life is not going to be the same, and he's being challenged to do something, and the question is, well, should he do it or not? Like, everything he does from now on is going to determine his future life, or what he doesn't do will determine his future life. So when you get below the surface, Renaissance prince, ancient castle, ghost in the middle of the night, and you get down to what makes his life similar to that of any high school student or any young teacher, then you're kind of figuring out what the book has to say, what it has to suggest. Here's another book that he's expected to teach and has read. We go to page 40, L'étranger by Albert Camus, The Stranger, The Outsider, different translations for the title. L'étranger should be a beautiful book to teach. The kids were discussing it when I sat at the back of the class, so he's been to the school that has hired him just to sit in for one day. They were fascinated by the fact that Meursault, the main character, never explains his thoughts. The teacher said it never fails. Just ask the kids what they think. Don't tell them what to think. You just point out the facts. Leave the meaning to the kids. Just keep opening up new avenues to explore. So a little teaching lesson there from the teacher at the school where he's going to teach. The meaning is in the minds of the readers, the students in this case, not in the book. The book is the stimulus to the meaning of the book, and it will have a different meaning for every student in the room. So he's kind of getting an idea of what these books have to say. Moving on with L'Étranger, Meursault is a young Algerian. Algeria is a colony of France. Meursault has a job in an office. He has a balcony on his apartment. He watches people strolling up and down the street. He likes to go to the beach. He likes to swim. And go to the movies. He has a girlfriend named Marie. Day after day, his life is pretty much the same. So here's another person with a routine, a fairly pleasant routine for him. Then we go to page 44 for another installment of thought. Meursault's old mother lives in a home. It's quite a long way from Algiers. Meursault goes and visits her once in a while. Then one day the old mother dies. He goes to sit with her body at the wake. For some reason unknown to us, he sheds no tears. So what's he thinking as he sits there at the funeral? Is there any hint anywhere else in the book? How do we know what someone is thinking if they never say? So an interesting thought, as with Hamlet, as with Meursault. What he thinks isn't really in the book. What he thinks is in the mind of the reader of the book, based on, of course, what is in the book. So developing a kind of response to these books, and potentially in the future how to write one's own book. Page 45. Meursault is easy to get along with. He falls in with a man named Ramon. Ramon invites Meursault to come to the beach. They have a run-in with a man who challenges Ramon. Meursault ends up with a gun. Strange things happen to us sometimes. He ends up with a gun in his hand, and the man who has challenged Ramon in front of his eyes. The man is coming towards him. The sun is hurting Meursault's eyes. What would you do in this situation if Meursault were you? So an interesting situation. There's something going on that's really not important to Meursault. It's on the periphery of his sense of what's important in life. but somehow he ends up being the one with the gun and a man coming at him. I mean, is this what life is all about? Things happen to you and you're put at the center of something that really you didn't think was all that important. You certainly didn't want to spend your life being involved with it or suffering the consequences of it. So figuring out what these books have to say to high school students, to a young teacher, to a future writer. 1984, let's go to page 112. Another book that he's going to be asked to teach, and he's reading them over in the summer at the beach on his time off from collecting garbage and just thinking about them. But here he is emptying cans as the truck moves along the street and thinking about these books. 1984 is pretty grim. Don't know how the kids will take to it. I didn't read it in high school. University for me. Animal Farm might have been a better choice. Some of them might know a lot of history. Some of them might not. So, is it a history book, 1984? Well, yeah, dystopian history and so on. Projected history into the future. But then again, you can see it as a novel about a couple of people. Two people trapped in a lifestyle and wondering how to get out. So when you go beneath the surface of these books, there's something there for you, like people trapped in a lifestyle wondering how to get out. You don't have to be living in the world of 1984 to have that as a personal situation. Then we go to 114. A man named Winston Smith lives in a city in Oceania. Oceania is fighting a major war. Everybody's controlled by the ruling party. Big Brother watches everything they do. The party's teaching the people to speak a new language. There won't be any words by which to think. Winston is being watched by a camera in his room. Is there such a thing as freedom? He decides to keep a diary of his thoughts. 116. One day Winston meets a girl. Her name is Julia, and she despises the government laws. They meet in a room above a store. There's no camera or telescreen in the room. Someone who opposes the ruling party wants to see him. This person is against the ways of the oppressive government. How did this person know that Winston feels the same? Winston and Julia read a book that exposes the fraud. There must be others in their society who think the same way. Then we go to the last installment of these thoughts about this book that he's going to be teaching, 1984. One day the soldiers break in on Winston and Julia. They're put in prison and questioned for days and days. They ask Winston to tell the truth about Julia. They ask Julia to betray Winston as well. The two lovers resist and resist. Romeo and Juliet, Heathcliff and Cathy, Troilus and Cressida. The one day the torturers strap a cage to Winston's face. Only one thing will allow you to keep these rats from eating your face, my dear Winston. Are you going to sacrifice Julia or not? Well, a highly dramatic book set in a terrible totalitarian state in the future, which it was when it was written in 1948, the title 1984, Projection in the Future, and two lovers being forced to, well, pressured to betray each other with this terrible device of a cage on the face with a rat eating your face while you're alive and watching it. But when you get down to a little lower level, loyalty. Romeo and Juliet, why does that book appeal? Well, it's about loyalty and lack of loyalty, failure to be loyal. Heathcliff and Cathy, Wuthering Heights, Troilus and Cressida. So there's a level at which these books resonate with everybody, and the challenge is to find that level in order to make these books valid. So let's go to 130. This will be the last book that I'll refer to in this video. Gatsby will be everyone in the room, though not everyone will know. Two kids sitting and talking in the Snow White Roadster. Now, I taught the Great Gatsby for many years, and before that I had a little white roadster, and I never really made the connection till last year when I was planning this novel. I thought, hey, I have a picture of myself, my future wife, and a little white roadster, 1960 Austin Healey Sprite. And of course, that's very powerful imagery in The Great Gatsby. Two young kids starting out on life, sitting in a white roadster, talking of their future plans. So Gatsby will be everyone in the room, though not everyone will know. 2 kids sitting and talking in a snow-white roadster. The green light shining at the end of the dock, the foul dust floating in the wake of some very powerful dreams. I won't talk about myself. They won't talk about themselves. We'll talk of Tom and Nick and Gatsby and Daisy Fay, a skinny kid swimming out to a ship in pursuit of a dream. So that's the fascinating thing about books. You can talk about other people and not yourself, especially when you're a teenager in a room with other people. You don't really want to talk about your personal hopes, fears, dreams, failures. But if you talk about other people, you can think about yourself without exposing your private thoughts. And that's how literature can work in a classroom. 132. J. Gatsby was born as Jimmy Gatz in the Midwest. He finds that he's on the bottom side of society. His people have always had to grub a life from the soil. One day he sees a yacht that is in danger. He swims out, and his warning saves the boat. It gives him a glimpse of how the rich people live. There's mahogany on the walls and a liquor cabinet, and the captain is welcome in any port. So Jimmy changes his name because he wants to be someone else. So this idea of becoming yourself, becoming a different self, if you get below the surface of 1920s gangsters and so on, it's a book about all of us, or it has resonance for all of us. 134 we go to next. Then the war comes along, and Gatsby becomes a soldier. He is stationed at a military camp to learn to fight. The young soldiers from the working class are invited to special events in the rich people's homes. Gatsby can't believe the sumptuousness of the dwellings. He thinks that a judge must be a multimillionaire. The judge has a daughter whose name is Daisy. She wears white dresses and has a car that is painted white. Gatsby falls in love with the daughter of the judge. They promise to marry each other after the war. And then the final Gatsby thought is this one. After the war, the girl is rich, while Gatsby is poor. He finds that Daisy has married someone else. Gatsby manages to acquire a lot of money in some mysterious way. He acquires a flashy roadster and a swimming pool and a river of monogrammed shirts. He lives in a mansion near her mansion across the bay. He stands and looks at the green light on her dock. He invites the girl and her husband to one of his extravaganzas. He wants to show her just how much he has acquired. He believes that he can make their lives go back in time. So again, we're not all 1920s gangsters with a mansion looking at a green light across the bay on another person's dock, but we're all people who have aspirations and who can measure what we have now against what we hope to have, or figure out how to move forward, moving towards those aspirations, or even whether those aspirations are ridiculous, asinine, or quite logical, or whether they need a slight adjustment. So here's a note. One question on the mind of this main character, myself at 21, is as to how the imagery of these great books will relate to the students in his classes. An accompanying question as to how or whether the imagery of these great books relates to his own life so far and to the life that he will be living in the future. Shallow literature tells us about some people of our own or other creeds, colors, races, and cultures. Serious literature tells us about all people, at the level at which we are all human, at the level at which we all have similar hopes and fears, at which we all enjoy the great ecstasies and endure the great agonies of the lives that all of us are leading as human beings. Works of shallow literature present myths of harmony within one's own society and conflict with other societies. Works of serious literature contain the myths of concord and of conflict within all individuals and all societies. Shallow literature narrows our perceptions and our thoughts. Serious literature widens and deepens our perceptions and our thoughts. If we write shallow polemic, praising one of the many elements that make our own people unique, and denigrating one of the elements that makes other people unique, then we are doing great harm, not only to ourselves, but to our fellows in this great world society in which we all live. If we write literature of depth, of the affirmation of the value of the lives of all human beings, then we are making a contribution not only to our immediate society, the society of our own race, creed, color, and culture, but to the culture of the entire world. Well, the book, again, is John Passfield's Saturday Morning. It's available on Amazon. If you go there, there's information. My publisher's website, rocksmillspress.com, rocksmillspress.com, has information. And my website, johnpassfield.ca, has 2 free books. A planning notebook, just click on the icon, and there's how I planned and wrote the book. And a journal, click on that icon, and you get my review of the book as I was polishing it, how I got to that point of having a complete book, and what I was planning to do in future novels as well, based on what I learned while writing that book. Lastly, I'll just say thank you for watching this video.